Okay. And okay. All right, cool. So today we are going to be making a personal website. I'll share relevant links. Let me go ahead and do that now, actually. So I'll put this in the Discord workshop. Let me know if you can't access that. So this project I forked actually from a different project. So got to give them credit. If you could actually, just to be a good member of the open source community, if you scroll to the bottom, it'll have the link to where I forked it. I should have made it an actual fork and it would have said like right here that I forked it. But next best thing is to just go to this link and hit star at the top. He asked that people star the repo to show that they like it. So it's a good member, or it's a good, always good to be a good open source community member. So this is a pretty basic template. If you felt, actually, one other thing. I mean, if you felt inclined, you could use a different template, like there are other ones at that link if you're not interested in using this one. But for this workshop, we'll just be using that. So we will learn about some more sophisticated file structures. Hopefully everyone didn't have any problems setting up the Flutter environment or an editor. Dartpad is nice, but it doesn't really provide you with a way to make more substantial projects that have multiple files. So we'll learn about how to structure projects, how to read and modify existing code, which is a very important skill to have. I don't know, pretty much professionally, you'll be contributing to someone else's code most likely, unless you're the first engineer at a startup. You'll learn about responsive design, responsive web pages, how to implement them in Flutter on the web. And then we'll deploy the site after we're done making changes to GitHub Pages. It's a free service that GitHub offers to deploy just static pages. You don't get to control the domain, but it's just your username.github.io. So, yeah, this is pretty much what it looks like. Just name, experience, education, skills. You can add whatever you'd like to it. It also has links down at the bottom right as well, which I actually didn't touch those. They might actually still link to the original creators' social medias. I'll show you how to change all of that. So yeah, should have access. So you can go ahead and fork the repo. I'm going to do that now. So I will do it on my own personal site so you guys can see how it's done. So if you click fork at the top right, and then you'll want to rename this to your username.github.io. So this repository name is kind of a special reserved name for GitHub. If you have a repository with that name, that means that you can deploy to the base domain for your GitHub pages. If you called it anything else, you could deploy to GitHub pages, but it would be like username.github.io/project name. But if you want to deploy to that base name, then you have to name it, as far as I know, at least, you have to name it username.github.io. So if you do that and hit create, it'll make your fork. Probably, okay, yeah. There we go. So we now have a fork under your personal username. And this isn't deployed yet. Probably what would be best is to go ahead and clone this on your local machine, make your changes, and then we can deploy. So if you copy it, And I may actually need to let's see. Oh, one thing I should do is make this a lot bigger. I'm going to remove the existing one. Yeah, hopefully that's readable. Okay. So git clone and hit enter. And then I'm going to open up that repo in a separate VS Code. I looked up actually the code command. You can just make like a shortcut. If you don't have that, then you can just open VS Code like this, like hit command space and search for it, or go to Finder and search for it, and then do, once you have VS Code open, you can do file open, and then navigate to wherever your project is. So we can open the new project, and I have the Dart extension, and it will prompt me every time it detects that things are out of date. It'll prompt to run Flutter pub get. So this workshop is meant to be like kind of self-guided. Hopefully you guys have like somewhat of an understanding of the basics. And so I'll just give you guys a few minutes to look through the code. I would start with lib main.dart, poke around in that file, look at, the other widgets that it references, get a feel for how the project is structured. You can see there's like somewhat of an intention here. So all your widgets are under the lib folder. I shouldn't say all your widgets, all your Dart code in general, all your Flutter code is under the lib folder. So there's like constants, models, UI, utilities, and then a responsive widget. Honestly, I probably would have changed this design a little bit myself, but it's fairly straightforward file structure. A lot of times with Flutter projects, it is useful, especially as you grow your project, to pick some sort of convention for organizing your files. So you can kind of, a file structure is very like, there's kind of like a hierarchy that you have to decide. So what I usually do, this is a personal project that I have, is I have features at the top level. So like authentication, I have like a compose feature. If users make drafts of things, homepage feature, etc. So that's kind of like a feature-oriented architecture. Whereas this, since it's pretty small, it doesn't really make sense to do it by feature because there's just, it's just one page. So instead, they've organized their folders by type, kind of by like the general thing that it does. So I would say those are probably the two most common. Definitely for smaller projects, you can do like just have widgets in one folder and I don't know, and utils and constants. But if you have more substantial projects, it usually makes more sense to organize things by feature. So, one second. Any questions or anything up to this point? Hopefully everyone was able to clone. So yeah, I would take a few minutes, look through the code, and try to run it as well. So actually, let me show that real quick. It should, if you run Flutter config, it'll tell you what platforms are enabled. And oh, I actually don't know why web isn't on. That's kind of odd. So let me change that. So if you do Flutter config, and then you want to do dash dash enable dash web. And you may need to restart VS Code, unfortunately, or maybe not even restart, but just close and then do open recent and then go back. See if it, normally the device will pop up here in this menu. If it makes me do like full quit, you can do that and it'll open, open everything back up. Let's see. There we go. Chrome web JavaScript. That's how you know that it's recognizing the web platform properly. So that there is already a .vs code if you're using this editor, and it should have launch configurations to launch the website. So it'll basically do Flutter run. So if you go to this run and debug tab on the left, it will basically parse this launch.json file. So you can see there's an entry here, an entry here, and one here. So there's 3 different configurations. And probably just this default one that doesn't have a profile or release mode is fine. And then you just hit run. And it should launch a tab. Or not a tab, but a window. And it usually creates a separate instance of Chrome. So should see a separate Google Chrome application open up. So yeah, if you have it running, it'll be a lot easier to see how things are structured because you can try changing things. So probably one of the simpler things is if you go to the strings, lib, constant, and strings. So I can put in my first name and hit save. And then it should do a hot restart. And you can see it'll change up there. So poke around in the code, update things. Obviously, kind of the basically the to-dos you'll have are changing the name at the top, me about me, experience, entries, education, skills. So yeah, go.
I wasn't able to come up with that.
The what?
I wasn't able to find it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Are you guys okay in terms of, okay, all right. Yeah. Trying to decide if I should pause the recording, but. So you have it. Okay. So probably it's just easiest to do file, open, Flickr, and then browse too. Yeah, guessing is the desktop. one thing that makes reading through code much easier. Maybe you guys already knew this, but on Mac, it's command click. If you see a widget, command click, and it'll take you to the file. Windows, it's probably control click. That makes jumping around between files a lot easier. And while you guys are doing that, I'm gonna take mine as well. Yep. Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what it is. same. It's interesting because this should be fine if you're on the same major version. So what I'll do. So that was an absolute import. But we're going to do dot version. Because I got. You just have to do it. Oh, well. It doesn't say the Dart version. Current Dart version is because the workshop required SDK. Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess it is. Okay. So let me. Yeah, I guess. Okay. Mhm.
All right, for those on the recording, some people are getting a Dart error if you run Flutter upgrade to make sure you're on the latest version. Hopefully that will resolve any errors if you did have any. All right, hopefully you guys have had a little bit of time to poke through the code. Just real quick to update the image. So if you go to lib constants images, he calls it programmer 3. It's that big GIF of the programmer in front of the computer. You can put in your own image and then change the file path. And then the other thing you'll have to do is actually to come down to pubspec. Well, let's see. No, you shouldn't have to change pubspec because it includes. So in Flutter, you have to specify where assets are. So that image is an asset, and you can use libraries to load different assets. You can just think of them as like images or videos, or maybe they're like huge text files or something that you might want to get access to while your app is running. And you'll have to specify those or list those as assets in your pubspec.yaml. But actually I made it so that it includes all images, but it's still not working. So I'm going to try stopping and rerunning. And let's see if that works. Maybe. There we go. It looks really grainy, so I would need to there might be a way to specify, let's see, scale, because if I click on it, yeah, it's definitely not that grainy. But when it loads, it does not look that great. Let's see. Search references, source, frame builder, width, height, color, opacity, fit. All it does is specifies the height. I'm gonna actually not do that. Yeah, that's way too big. Okay. We definitely want to do that then. Yeah, I'm unsure of how to get that to not be quite as grainy, but I'll debug that on my end. And anyways, so hopefully the layout of everything is pretty straightforward enough that you can update it to, put in your own info. Probably the only other important thing I wanted to point out in terms of like interesting features of the website is that it is responsive. So if I scale this down, eventually my image will get cut off and it'll just show this. So like on a tablet, it would still look good. And then if I viewed it on mobile, it would still look fine as well. So this responsive widget will basically allow the layout to kind of change based on the current screen size. And the basics of how that works is, actually, I don't think this actually isn't needed. So it wasn't the cleanest project that I copied, but so responsive widget has large screen, medium screen, and small screen. Those are the 3 parameters. And basically this widget will display one of those 3 depending on the screen size. So the question marks after these means that they are nullable, which basically just means you don't actually have to provide them. So it's kind of a nice feature of this widget is that you can just give it one widget and it will basically just always display it. And in order to figure out what screen to show, which of those three widgets to show. Do I show a vertical layout, a horizontal layout? Do I totally hide this element? It uses, and this is pretty common, is media query.of. So basically you're saying like what's media query.of will give you a lot of information about like the current device. But if you do media query.of.size.width, so that'll tell you how wide the current screen is. And basically that's what it uses, is just the width to figure out what size you're currently running on. And so it just has different thresholds to figure out which one to show. And then basically when it goes to actually render the widget, it'll just, based on the current constraints, it'll figure out which of the three to show. And now that I'm looking at this it actually is a little messy because it doesn't even call these methods. You actually could change it so that it would call these methods. But it does the same thing. So it'll figure out based on the current constraints, layout builder, this widget will like allow you to respond to the current constraints. And it'll say like if constraints.max width. So if that current width is greater than 768, then display the large option. Otherwise, if it's between 1200 and 425, show the medium. If the medium is null, so if that wasn't provided, then show large. And then if the max width is less than that 425, it'll show the small screen or default to the large if that's the only one that was provided. So yeah, I kind of assumed some of this code's a little messy, but hopefully you get the idea. You can kind of, if you want to make a responsive widget, just figure out, you can use layout builder and figure out what the current screen width is, or in your build method, another option is to do a media query to figure out the current screen dimensions. And honestly, like if I were to like actually use those methods, you would do like is large screen context, then show large screen, else is medium screen, show the medium, else, and you wouldn't even need the small screen because you already used the other two. So yeah, responsive widgets are nice. Let's see actually if it still should still work. Yeah. That new logic. It should be scrollable. Yeah. So if they're looking on a really small screen, it'll scroll vertically. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Probably the other important thing to point out is in terms of terminology, maybe you guys have already heard of the term models, but in terms for app development, a lot of times there's data structures that are like convenient to have in your app. So for this web page, education, like an education entry, usually has, you know, a from date, to date, institution, degree. Likewise, the experience model would be from, to, organization, title. So data models are pretty much essential in larger scale apps to kind of, you know, create objects that encompass things that you care about. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward to understand. The nice thing is you don't have to understand everything. So now, if there's no questions, do you guys need a few minutes to keep editing, or do we want to go into deploying it? I'm fine either way. Obviously, we got some time. Good. All right, cool. So I can show how to deploy. So once you have your changes, I'll just use the command line instead of the UI. So I will do git add dot to add all the files that I made changes to. And then git commit, add a message, updated with my info. and then git push. Git push will actually push it to GitHub. So hopefully all three of those steps work for you. And now what you can do is if you go back to your GitHub page, you should see updated with my info. And actually, I thought that I would have to enable this by default, but it looks like I didn't, which is interesting. Let's see. Let me know when you guys push. Basically, there's a GitHub action, which will basically like, it's listening to when you push to the repo, and then it's going to run this action that will actually deploy it to GitHub pages. Hopefully this happens automatically for you. If it doesn't, let me know. There was one time where I forked it and I didn't make any changes. I just immediately deployed, and I went to this actions tab and I had to hit like enable workflows or something first. But did it go for you? Okay, cool. So I guess you don't have to do that step. So assuming the deploy worked, you can just go straight up to the browser bar, and if you just remove everything and just have your GitHub pages URL. Oh, this is only doing the README. That's not right. Oh, I know what we need to do. There is one step that you have to do. So if you go into the settings tab and then pages. So there, when GitHub pages first launched, they basically configured it so that it would read a certain section of your project's file structure and use that to render the web page. So like whatever file you put here, root or /docs, it would look for index.html there to figure out how to render your web page. And by default, it actually just rendered the README. But how I decided to set it up is I did GitHub Actions, which is in beta, but I found that it still works pretty well. And the action should already be there. Yeah, it's actually this one is what you want. So you'll click on deploy static content to pages on the left, and then hit run workflow. So it's just a slightly different way to deploy to GitHub pages. Basically, running through GitHub Actions just gives you more control over how things are actually deployed. The old method that they had, where it would just look at your file system, it was essentially doing what this same action is doing, but now this beta feature that they're testing is like you can control the action yourself. So after that's done running, let's see, it's still only rendering the README. Let's see, settings, pages. Of course, this happens when I do it live. If let's see. Yeah, there's still only the one workflow in there. Yeah, I don't know why it would. Why would it still be rendering the README? There we go. Okay, it just took a little bit. But it's not rendering the changes that I made. because I updated it with my information. Let me hard refresh. No, that's not doing it. Remove. Let me try running this one more time. Yes, this is a lesson that when you do your demos, do it in the exact same order that you did it when you were testing. The order I did it when I was kind of going through it earlier is I just forked it and then immediately deployed it before making changes. Let's see. Very odd. Was anyone else able to deploy? I'm curious if they're getting the same issue or not. Update with my info. And this action will run on the main branch. .650, yeah, updated with my info. But it's still not updated. That's very weird. Let's see. Assets, images. Oh, it's not. Interesting. It's not. Whoops. No, I want to go to images. That is kind of weird that it's not. On branch main, pages, GitHub pages, upload the artifact, build web, and deploy. Maybe, oh, I know what I forgot to do. So if you make changes, there's actually a build output. So whenever you enable web, there's the web directory, and this has files that you can use like kind of during development. But when you go to actually deploy a website, you actually have to do Flutter build web. And that will basically place everything that's needed for deployment into this build web directory. And normally this build folder is ignored by Git. It's kind of seen as like, you wouldn't want to commit this to a GitHub because it could be quite large. But because we're doing GitHub pages, because we're like the GitHub repo is for the web page, I removed it from, or I made it so Git did not ignore it because we do want to push that. And you can see actually it made changes. You can't see very well, but it made changes to those files. And those I do have to commit to actually update the build folder. So update build folder, commit, and then sync. Commit and sync is the same thing as, git add, git commit, git push. Now if I update the build folder, this GitHub pages deployment workflow was automatically triggered because I did a push. Shouldn't take too long. There we go. Yeah, so an important note, if you make changes, you got to do Flutter build web before pushing. So any questions? Cool. So now you have a personal website to put on your resume. And yeah, just looks that much better. I think it's nice for an employer to see kind of took the time to set up your own personal website. It's easier to share as well. So if there's no questions, then that's all I got.